Welcome to the terrifying nightmare of modern Microsoft, where your reliable operating system was quietly replaced by a desperate, bloated gateway for endless subscriptions, telemetry, and inescapable AI slop everywhere. We really have to go back to the golden era of Windows 7 to understand this tragic fall, an operating system that actually respected your workflow and stayed perfectly invisible. Remember when a search bar simply found your files instantly instead of taking 4 agonizing seconds to aggressively push Bing web results and utterly useless AI tools into your face? Microsoft fundamentally panicked when touchscreens arrived, utterly convinced the desktop was dying, which predictably led to the absolute disaster that was Windows 8 and its completely baffling interface design choices. While Windows 10 hastily brought back the Start menu to appease furious users, it sneakily introduced telemetry that sent your diagnostic data and search behavior straight back to Microsoft headquarters. Worse still, fresh installs suddenly featured Candy Crush and Twitter pinned directly in your Start menu without your consent, clearly showing that you were now the actual product being sold. Then Windows 11 arrived on the scene, immediately declaring 400 million perfectly capable PCs completely incompatible just because Microsoft arbitrarily decided they desperately needed a TPM.2 chip. It was technically a free upgrade, but the brutal reality was that Windows had merely transformed into a shameless funnel for aggressively upselling OneDrive, Outlook subscriptions, and endless recurring revenue. With the stage thoroughly set for absolute corporate greed, Microsoft desperately sought the next big trend to lock users down, and they found their golden goose with OpenAI and ChatGPT. Having invested $13 billion into the technology, Microsoft recklessly decided to shove their new Copilot AI directly into every single crevice of Windows, whether you actually wanted it or not. They even forced hardware manufacturers to include a dedicated Copilot key on new keyboards, replacing a perfectly good button that had comfortably sat there in peace since 1994. But surely this incredibly expensive, highly touted AI assistant was useful, right? Well, actually, it mostly just sat in a pathetic side panel uselessly explaining how to do simple tasks. When asked to bold every date in a Word document, Copilot simply refused to do the work and provided tedious manual instructions instead, proving itself to be completely utterly useless. The situation was so absurdly bad that Microsoft explicitly warned its own users not to trust Copilot in Excel because the AI routinely hallucinated numbers and completely fabricated financial data. Despite the product clearly being unfinished and completely untrustworthy, Microsoft recklessly shipped it anyway, violently pinning it to your taskbar by default and aggressively auto-installing it through basic security updates. They began forcibly shoving this artificial intelligence slop into Notepad, Paint, and the Snipping Tool, completely ruining simple lightweight programs that people have quietly relied on for absolutely several decades. Behind the scenes, developers were allegedly experimenting with a terrifying concept known as Project Ion, a nightmarish web-based operating system completely swallowed whole by this relentless, unavoidable Copilot artificial intelligence integration. In this frankly horrifying vision of the future, the beloved Start button was completely eradicated, replaced by a web portal that aggressively connected you to remote cloud servers via Edge. Every application you opened was merely a disguised browser window tracking your every move, requiring a constant internet connection, entirely stripping away your precious local files and ultimate system ownership. People rightfully panicked, referring to the entire mess as Microslop, going so far as to build enormously popular browser extensions solely designed to replace the company name with that insult. The company brutally banned the word slop from their official Discord servers, desperately trying to silence the rising tide of furious users who absolutely hated having AI forced upon them. The adoption numbers completely tanked as a direct result of this massive overreach, revealing that out of 450 million subscribers, a pathetic 3% actually paid up. A former vice president brutally mocked the situation on Twitter, publicly laughing at the total failure and advising the giant tech corporation to just fix their terribly broken core products. Internal meetings were reportedly filled with absolute panic as executives stared at flatlining growth charts, while 80% of salespeople completely failed to hit their comically unrealistic artificial intelligence targets. When enterprise workers were actually given a fair choice between all available AI tools on the modern market, a completely humiliating 8% voluntarily chose to utilize Microsoft's terrible Copilot. Things escalated from merely embarrassing to genuinely dangerous when the United States House of Representatives officially banned Copilot from all their devices over some extremely terrifying hidden security data concerns. A massive cybersecurity vulnerability known as EchoLeak was exposed, proving that Copilot would silently send your private data to an external server if it merely summarized a cleverly malicious email. The user did not even have to physically open the email for this catastrophic exploit to work, utterly destroying any remaining trust that major corporations might have had in Microsoft. Another humiliating bug allowed the supposedly advanced intelligence to completely bypass sensitivity labels, happily reading extremely confidential enterprise emails that it was absolutely never supposed to be able to access. The problem amazingly went completely undetected for roughly 4 entire weeks, deeply compromising institutions like the National Health Service, while Microsoft aggressively refused to disclose how many others were hit. You would naturally assume a massive trillion-dollar tech giant with an entire dedicated cybersecurity division could flawlessly prevent these basic privacy disasters, but you would be absolutely terribly wrong. Meanwhile, normal home users were discovering that if you simply wished to disable this invasive AI entirely, you essentially had to dive incredibly deep into obscure registry edits or scripts. Brave tech enthusiasts on GitHub created extensive PowerShell scripts solely dedicated to viciously stripping every single trace of AI slop directly out of the heavily bloated Windows 11 operating system. People frantically deleted Recall, deactivated the frankly bizarre gaming Copilot, and ripped out the utterly pointless AI injected into simple classic apps like Paint just to regain basic system stability. Unfortunately, running these complicated removal scripts carried the serious risk of completely breaking future mandatory Windows updates, leaving frustrated users permanently stuck between a severely broken system and forced slop. And Microsoft essentially knew they had their captive audience completely trapped, so they aggressively pushed price hikes, massively inflating subscription costs for family plans by nearly 30% completely unprovoked. They even intentionally hid the cheaper classic subscription plan, cowardly forcing users to actually initiate the complex cancellation process just to discover that a reasonably priced option still quietly existed. This blatantly deceptive corporate behavior was so utterly appalling that the Australian government literally dragged Microsoft straight into federal court, officially accusing them of severely misleading millions of paying customers. CEO Satya Nadella privately realized the absolute disaster unfolding, reportedly joining an internal developer channel to furiously critique his own poorly designed products, repeatedly calling the AI integrations not smart. Eventually, the absolutely massive public backlash became totally impossible to ignore, forcing the incredibly stubborn tech giant to finally admit their spectacular failure and initiate a highly embarrassing public retreat. In March 2026, they officially published a blog post desperately promising to radically reduce unnecessary AI entry points and frantically focus on genuinely useful core Windows desktop experiences. Almost overnight, the deeply hated Copilot started quietly disappearing from Snipping Tool, Photos, and Widgets, while the obnoxious default taskbar button was finally switched off for millions of relieved users. Microsoft finally delivered a massive update that allowed furious IT administrators to completely and permanently uninstall Copilot from their entire professional network devices, a feature heavily requested for over a year. Pro users could access the group policy editor, navigate deeply into the Windows AI Components folder, and brilliantly toggle a beautiful setting titled Remove Microsoft Copilot App to finally escape. For standard home users, the incredibly complicated removal process strictly required creating a completely new registry folder perfectly named Windows AI and manually inserting a 32-bit value override. It truly seemed like a massive, hard-fought victory for basic consumer rights, finally giving desperately frustrated people the ultimate choice to reclaim their beloved computer from invasive corporate AI. But remember, this is Microsoft we are actually talking about here. Their immense corporate greed genuinely never stops. It merely changes its terrifying shape to trick you in entirely new ways. Just weeks after supposedly apologizing to users, they quietly pulled all the previously free Copilot features completely out of basic enterprise Word and Excel applications without any major public announcement. If these frustrated workers actually wanted to keep utilizing the tools they had integrated into their workflow, they suddenly had to pay a ridiculous $30 extra every single month. They cowardly buried this highly controversial pricing update deep inside restricted administrator notifications, desperately hoping the massive mainstream media would completely fail to notice their incredibly shady modern business tactics. So they forcefully took the absolute biggest technological opportunity in a generation and spectacularly transformed it into arguably the most expensive and embarrassing corporate mistake in entire modern computing history. Despite pouring $13 billion straight into OpenAI and spending another $80 billion constructing massive infrastructure, they somehow ended up with a product that almost nobody genuinely wants to use. Adding absolutely massive insult to injury, the latest iterations of their deeply flawed Copilot system are now partially powered by competitor AI models directly built by Anthropic and Google themselves. The supposedly revolutionary product that was aggressively meant to loudly prove Microsoft could independently lead the global AI race is now ironically being sustained by the exact competitors winning it. Satya and Nadella constantly obsessed over past massive corporate failures, deeply fearing they would entirely miss the modern artificial intelligence revolution just like they tragically missed the massive mobile phone wave. Because of this immense paranoia, they brutally forced an unfinished, highly insecure product down everyone's throat, completely alienating their massively loyal user base and totally destroying years of established trust. Now, hardcore operating system enthusiasts are excitedly jumping ship to Linux in absolutely massive numbers, discovering that modern gaming and basic productivity apps actually work perfectly fine without the bloat. It ultimately proves a highly critical business lesson. You absolutely cannot force a brilliant futuristic innovation by rapidly building it upon a severely crumbling, aggressively bloated legacy software foundation architecture. Windows has arguably lost its core fundamental identity entirely, painfully transforming from a highly respected tool that empowered genuine creation into a highly desperate digital billboard pushing absolute AI slop. In the end, Microsoft desperately tried to forcefully conquer the massive artificial intelligence revolution, but instead, they permanently ruined Windows and predictably got left completely behind in the digital dust.
If you find this video interesting, push like and subscribe buttons. Take care.